Wilson Rivers and Alan Reeder. But there's only one reader who's read or heard aloud every draft of this story, my wife Janet, for literally the thousands of pages she's endured, not to mention her tolerance of enforced travel. I thank her with all my love. Lastly, I want to express my affection for my editor, Harvey Ginsberg, who officially retired before I handed him the 1,100-page manuscript. Retired or not, Harvey edited me. I repeat, I don't know India, and The Son of the Circus isn't about India. It is, however, a novel set in India, a story about an Indian but not an Indian, for whom India will always remain an unknown and unknowable country. If I've managed to get the details right, my Indian friends deserve the credit. Those of you familiar with the Willingdon Club in Bombay will recognize the fictional Duckworth Club in this novel, and especially those of you familiar with Lady Willingdon, Lord Willingdon's wife. Lord Willingdon was the founder of the club and the governor of Maharashtra. You will recall that Lady Willingdon suffered from an embarrassing affliction. She was a kleptomaniac. Worse, she stole from the Willingdon Club anything she could get her hands on: cutlery, tennis trophies, snooker balls, you name it, she stole it. And it fell to Lord Willingdon to return to the club those items he could find from his wife's vast treasury of thievery. When I was in Bombay, I was touched by this story, and I wished for Lady Willingdon that she might have suffered a less embarrassing, more dignified vice than kleptomania. With that in mind, I changed her name to Lady Duckworth and made her an exhibitionist. Exhibitionism, at least when you compare it to kleptomania, is relatively charming.
For Salman. A Son of the Circus. 1. The Crow on the Ceiling Fan. Blood from Dwarfs. Usually the dwarfs kept bringing him back to the circus and back to India. The doctor was familiar with the feeling of leaving Bombay for the last time. Almost every time he left India, he vowed that he'd never come back. Then the years would pass, as a rule not more than 4 or 5, and once again he'd be taking the long flight from Toronto. That he was born in Bombay was not the reason. At least, this was what the doctor claimed. Both his mother and father were dead. His sister lived in London, his brother in Zurich. The doctor's wife was Austrian, and their children and grandchildren lived in England and in Canada. None of them wanted to live in India. They rarely visited the country, nor had a single one of them been born there. But the doctor was fated to go back to Bombay. He would keep returning again and again, if not forever, at least for as long as there were dwarfs in the circus. Achondroplastic dwarfs comprise the majority of circus clowns in India. They are the so-called circus midgets, but they're not midgets, they're dwarfs. Achondroplasia is the most common type of short-limbed dwarfism. An achondroplastic dwarf can be born of normal parents, but the dwarf's children have a 50% chance of being dwarfs. This type of dwarfism is most often the result of a rare genetic event, a spontaneous mutation, which then becomes a dominant characteristic in the dwarf's children. No one has discovered a genetic marker for this characteristic, and none of the best minds in genetics are bothering to search for such a marker. Quite possibly, only Dr. Farrokh Daruwalla had the far-fetched idea of finding a genetic marker for this type of dwarfism. By the passion of such a wishful discovery, the doctor was driven to gather samples of dwarf blood. The whimsy of his idea was plain. His dwarf blood project was of no orthopedic interest, and he was an orthopedic surgeon. Genetics was only one of his hobbies. Yet, although Farrokh's visits to Bombay were infrequent and the duration of his stay was always short, no one in India had ever drawn blood from so many dwarfs. No one had bled as many dwarfs as Dr. Daruwalla had bled. In those Indian circuses that passed through Bombay, or in such circuses as frequented the smaller towns in Gujarat and Maharashtra, it was with affection that Farrokh was called the Vampire. This is not to suggest that a physician in Dr. Daruwalla's field in India wouldn't stumble across a fair number of dwarfs. They suffer from chronic orthopedic problems, aching knees and ankles, not to mention low back pain. Their symptoms are progressive according to their age and weight. As dwarfs grow older and heavier, their pain gradually radiates into the buttocks, posterior thighs, and calves.